Today, President Trump's tariffs getting a major decision in the Supreme Court after the court ruled that they were going to strike down large portions of the administration's global tariff plan, finding that the president exceeded his authority. Fox's Caroline Shively with everything you need to know.
A defiant President Trump says he's going around the Supreme Court ruling and implementing a new 10% global tariff.
I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed.
President Trump irate at Friday's ruling from the Supreme Court, striking down his sweeping reciprocal tariffs, a major blow to his signature trade policy.
Foreign countries that have been ripping us off for years are ecstatic. They're so happy.
In a 6-3 decision, the justices ruled levying tariffs was the job of Congress. Chief Justice John Roberts writing, the framers did not vest any part of the taxing power in the executive branch.
This huge amount of money, hundreds of billions of dollars at stake, you want to see Congress authorize the president to explicitly impose tariffs.
Despite the president's disappointment, stocks rallied after the news, with many, but not all, business owners expressing relief.
I imagine there's a flurry of activity right now with importers, small businesses, auto parts importers, anybody you can think of, sneakers, athletic wear, raincoats. Pull it in right now.
Not every tariff is going away. The administration used a separate law to slap tariffs on steel and aluminum, cars, copper, and lumber. Justice Kavanaugh, who wrote the dissenting opinion, said the ruling might even require the U.S. to issue billions of dollars in tariff refunds to businesses, a process he acknowledged is likely to be a mess. In Washington, Caroline Shively, Fox News.
And standing by is Professor Mark Wu of Harvard Law. He's an expert in international trade. During Trump's press conference today, Mark, the president said that he wants to work around the court's decision. What avenues does he have to do that if he can?
He's got multiple avenues, including the ones that he used in his first term to impose tariffs, which were for unfair trade practices or for national security concerns. But for the time being, he's relying upon something known as Section 122 tariffs. And this is to address where there's a balance of payments problem, meaning when there's a trade deficit problem, and he has the authority to impose tariffs up to 15%. For now, he said he'll do so at the 10% level, and he can do so for up to 150 days.
I read that the Treasury Department has collected billions of dollars from these tariffs already. Will that money stay put, or is there a potential that it'll have to be refunded?
This remains to be seen. The Supreme Court did not provide a clear answer on this. So what this means is it's going to go down to the courts below. And there are lots of cases pending there, and they will rule on that. And so this is an issue that will still be litigated.
You know, I want to play out a little bit of reaction from Senator Rand Paul and from Justice Neil Gorsuch. Gorsuch, by the way, was appointed by Trump to the Supreme Court. He voted to strike down Trump's tariffs. Rand Paul posting Gorsuch's remarks. I'll start with Paul. He says, for anyone putting loyalty to a person above loyalty to the Constitution, Justice Gorsuch's remarks should be required reading. His words are a reminder that our highest duty is to the rule of law and the founding principles that define America. Then Gorsuch's statement reads as follows. For those who think it's important for the nation to impose more tariffs, I understand that today's decision will be disappointing. All I can offer them is that most major decisions affecting the rights and responsibilities of the American people, including the duty to pay taxes and tariffs, are funneled through the legislative process for a reason. Yes, legislating can be hard and take time, and yes, it can be tempting to bypass Congress when some pressing problem arises. But the deliberative nature of the legislative process was the whole point of its design. Through that process, the nation can tap the combined wisdom of the people's elected representatives, not just that of one faction or man. There, deliberation tempers impulse, and compromise hammers disagreements into workable solutions. And because laws must earn such broad support to survive the legislative process, they tend to endure, allowing ordinary people to plan their lives in ways they cannot when the rules shift from day to day. In all, the legislative process helps ensure each of us has a stake in the laws that govern us and in the nation's future. For some today, the weight of those virtues is apparent. For others, it may not seem so obvious. But if history is any guide, The tables will turn, and the day will come when those disappointed by today's results will appreciate the legislative process for the bulwark of liberty that it is. Gorsuch saying that earlier today. President Trump has not been shy, saying that he's disappointed with some of the justices that made today's decision. Mark, let's just go over, and if you can, put this in layman's terms. What is the legal standard that the court applied to today's ruling?
So it's a really interesting case in the sense that the 6 conservative justices all think that there is something that's known as a major questions doctrine. So on a major question, Congress has to provide a clear statement if it's choosing to delegate its authority, in this case, right, control over foreign commerce, to the president. 3 of the justices thought the court that Congress did not provide this clear statement, and 3 thought that they did. So there was a split amongst the conservative justices, and then you have the 3 liberal justices who said basically, we don't think this doctrine applies, but we read the statute as also not allowing the president this authority. So there you have this 6-3, but it's not the usual 6-3 that we're used to thinking about when we look at these Supreme Court cases.
Let's talk about Congress. Live look at the Capitol, about 6:20 in the nation's capital. The court's decision discusses trade-making authority between Congress and the executive. In your opinion, what are you watching for next in Congress? What should Congress do next to clarify who has power over tariffs?
Well, I think Congress is going to see what the president does, right? So, for example, president has this 150-day authority, but then it turns back to Congress. And so we'll see, does Congress just allow that to expire, these Section 122 tariffs that the president just imposed, or not? So I think that's one thing that we're going to be looking at. Another thing is I expect this is not the only thing that the White House will do. So the White House will put in place a number of other tariffs through other authorities, including those that they used in the first term. And on those types of issues, Congress has deferred much more to the president, including the ones that you alluded to earlier, the steel aluminum, the car tariffs, and so forth. So it'll be interesting also to see to what extent the president chooses to use those additional authorities that are available to him, and whether or not Congress is going to pass anything else new to either curb those authorities or to provide greater clarity on the existing authorities.
This decision is raising questions about when the president can use emergency powers for economic policy. How do you assess the boundaries that the court has now placed in and around emergency economic authority for the executive branch?
So I think the decision, more importantly, rules less on the question of what constitutes an emergency or not. It didn't really say these were made up emergencies with regards to the balance of payments or the drug issues and so forth. It just talked about what types of steps the president can use and what types of tools are available when these emergencies arise. And it said, you can't use tariffs. At least 6 members of the Supreme Court saw that being the case.
One more question for you before we go. Gavin Newsom, we're going to be playing a little bit of sound from Gavin in a moment here. The governor of California saying, Trump has been illegally taxing your groceries, furniture, and cars for over a year. Time for a refund. Are there legs to what Governor Newsom is saying, Mark?
So I think there's a lot more litigation to play out before we see whether or not the courts agree with Governor Newsom. There certainly are cases before the lower courts arguing that importers should be entitled to a refund, but it's unclear whether that is the case, and if so, what the process is and who amongst the importers would be entitled to this.
Mark Wu, appreciate the time tonight. Mark is a professor at Harvard Law. He's also an expert in international trade. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on.
You bet. So what we're going to do next, speaking of Governor Newsom, the governor was in San Quentin, California earlier today. He was participating in an event, then he had some media availability. He was asked about the Trump decision today by the Supreme Court. He talked a little bit about it. Let's listen.
The tariffs were illegal from day one. We were in Fresno. We were the first state. I was the first governor to announce the lawsuit with Attorney General Bonta on the illegal tariffs. under the emergency authority that Donald Trump was asserting. Shocking to me that 3 members of the Supreme Court actually agreed with Donald Trump. There's nothing in the International Economic Emergencies Power Act that gives the President of the United States unilateral authority to impose a tax increase on ranchers, on farmers, on small businesses, on you and me. Donald Trump should return that money immediately. He has an obligation, $1,751 per family, that were taxed by Donald Trump. He took hundreds of billions of dollars from working folks, from the ag community, from small businesses, for this vanity play, this illegal action. And he finally was held to account. The rule of law won out. And what did Donald Trump do? He had a tantrum today. And he decided to tax you all again across the board, 10% across the board under some new authority. He's unhinged. Donald Trump is increasingly unhinged. Even his hand-picked Supreme Court said what he was doing was lawless. And I'll end on this because this is important. It was a coercive policy that has produced what result? You saw GDP growth in the fourth quarter. GDP has now declined under the Trump administration. Unemployment has gone up under the Trump administration. Manufacturing jobs have gone down under the Trump administration. His entire theory of the case is falling apart. And this, the most regressive sales tax in modern American history. Finally, that will come to an end. Pay us back. Put that money back in the pockets of working families and the American people.